I had not met Nadim until half an hour ago.
Yeah, half an hour. Yeah, actually feels like longer now. We've got to know each other quite well.
We've become good friends, which is just as well because we've also discovered we did literally a 10-minute walk from each other in West London.
10-minute walk from each other, about 80 miles away from here. How long is that?
So looking forward to getting to know Nadim and his wife Tanya when we hopefully get back to London. Well, thank you for making it out this evening. It's lovely to see the room so full. Of course, we're particularly thankful to you, Nadim, not only for traveling this way, but also for being willing to share what is a very personal story, and no doubt one that doesn't get any easier in the telling, despite the fact that we told it over a number of years to a variety of people like this here this evening. To help us just to get to know you, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, your family, and what life was like, and it's before the events that we will be discussing this evening?
Yeah, so what can I say about myself? Just looking at your age, just like a little bit younger than me by a couple of years, maybe. Just say that. So my background really is going back before I met my wife, Tanya, who sort of that. So it was very much around business and design, etc. So I was used to design pretty much most of Action Man, Barbie dolls, My Little Pony, Brio wooden trains, those things. So basically, very much into designing products for children. Come from a science background, also from an art school background combined. And started a couple of companies before I met Tanya, my wife, and very much into being successful, doing well, sort of typical, perhaps, measures that humans might have as themselves. How well was I doing based on how the company was going, how many employees I had, all the usual stuff, really, that might seem quite normal still today. But so very focused on that and very focused on success, not so much focused on money, but because money comes as a result of being successful at something. That was very much how I worked and viewed. And that actually came true, entirely true. So through children's products, started a toy company, was traveling about 26 countries a year around the world, building up more and more businesses across America, etc. So you can imagine very, very focused on what I was doing and very little less and really how I put it. Until I met Tanya. And we had 2 children, of course.
Well, tell us about your childhood as well. Just what made you the person that you grew up to be?
Yeah, so I'm a single child. Both my mum and my dad, so my mum's French from Paris, came over as an au pair when she was about 18 years old for learning English and never went back to Paris. She was one of 5 children, the oldest. And my dad is actually from the borders of Afghanistan, Pakistan. And he came over to the UK when he was about 18. And he was the eldest of 5 as well. A bit weird, isn't it? So my mum, traditionally, technically, I suppose, a Catholic, because she grew up going to church. Doesn't necessarily mean she was a profound believer, but that was very much the culture of the day, certainly in France. And my dad, well, being Muslim, you can imagine, had to partake in everything in his own country. But when they arrived here back in the 60s, really, when I was 4, it's fair to say neither of them had any strong faith, that neither of them went to any church or anything. And I grew up on my own, with my mum and my dad, very much in a non-religious household. We never talked about religion. We never talked about God. And just to be clear, we certainly never talked about Jesus.
So a secular home, really.
That's I used that word, couldn't I? Just to sum up what I said. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
But did you find your mind turning to God at all? Was it a question that just sat there in your frame of reference, or not really? Did you just get on with life as growing up without giving God a second thought?
No, I don't. I really say, Hannah, I never gave God or anything a second thought. And I only say this to you if it's helpful for me, frankly. And I think it's the whole point for me to be truthful about everything I say and speak Yeah, I really in my own power. And what I mean by my own power, I don't mean to make that sound overly arrogant, but what I mean my own strength is really, and I could do and achieve anything largely down to myself and my own ability to understand a problem, a situation, and essentially overcome it. Wielding my own sword, essentially, which is how I live my life, pretty much, for most of my life, really, actually. Yeah.
That's a very modern story in lots of ways, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then, Nadim, you mentioned you met Tanya, and in a sense that changed things for you. And then tell us a little bit about life after marriage and children. And
Yeah, so I met my lovely wife Tanya on the 30th birthday in a pub. There you go. In May, having a quiet drink, and we sort of looked across the road, and you saw each other, and that's the beginning of something. I'm sure some of you here will know what that's like. So, yeah, we were both single children. We are both single children, and I think we had a view that we wanted to do something a bit different, and that's why we had two children, the girl, Natasha, who came first, and then 2 years later, our son Alex. And we're really very happy with that kind of four of us: boy, girl, husband and wife, etc. But Natasha, in early days, when she was 6 months old, we discovered she was allergic to different foods. She was food allergic, something that we'd never actually even heard of in our whole lives. And it's not something that anyone in our family had experienced before.
so you are living this very secular existence, raising a family, and of course our minds now turn to that moment where your life would change dramatically with your daughter Natasha's passing. I appreciate this is maybe a very painful conversation. Would you mind just talking us through the events of that day, what happened, the slides and what unfolded as a result?
Yes, it's just to set the scene before going straight to that. So our daughter Natasha, I'm sorry, some of you may have food allergies here. I'm conscious that might be the case, and if you don't, then someone in your family or your good friends might do. Some of what you might hear might be a little bit hard, actually. But Natasha had food allergies. We discovered she was allergic to banana early on, to eggs, to dairy, cow's milk proteins, and to some nuts and sesame seeds. We discovered each of those in different ways. But there we lived a life for essentially 15 years, husband, wife, daughter, elder, she was, all her years, we spent reading packets of ingredients on every single thing that came into the house or was purchased outside, reading them every week again and again, because sometimes you might know that ingredients change on packaged foods from one week to another. Nestle cereal looks the same on the front of the box, for example, but actually they've added a new ingredient on the back and small writing. So you have to be extraordinarily diligent and act like an investigative journalist for your whole life, as did she. But you assume this kind of life because that's the only one you know. But like many people who have a condition, you get on with it, basically, as best as you can. It's worth saying that at that time there was no real help at all from, say, the NHS or anything in society, because food allergies were not really understood. And it was really at the early days of food allergy, whereas now it's evolved some. But in 2016, so it is a few years ago, we decided that I'd take Natasha and her best friend Bethany, who was aged 14, both best friends in school, on a trip to France, south of France, where we used to go all the time for holidays, because my mum and dad had a place down there, so it was quite safe, and self-catering, etc., minimal risks, etc. And my wife Tanya and our son would stay in London, and had some friends coming. So early flight out of Heathrow Terminal 5, big place. I knew it backwards. You go in and out of there pretty much every other week for business. Because it was really early flight, the first one out, we get up early, and then your tummies start to rumble pretty quick, basically, once you start moving. So before boarding, we grabbed some food at the Pret-a-Manger which I knew well. I often use Pokemon for work, travel. And like always, if you're food allergic, you pick up the sandwich, you look at the packaging, you read it, etc. You examine it like that. This is Natasha. Pass it on to your dad, me, and to your friend, and everybody gives it a kind of a thorough, kind of doctor-like examination. That's quite normal. Bought it, sat down quickly here, and ate it, and straight onto the plane within sort of 15 minutes, and the plane's taken off and gone for a 2-hour flight. I'm reading like the business pages of the Sunday Times here. Natasha's here, and her best friend Bethany by the window. So the three of us straight. And as we flight was sort of well into France, crossing France, Natasha started to feel unwell. I didn't think too much of it at the time. Or maybe it's just sort of, kind of combo of nerves every morning, etc. But she actually lifted up her top like that, and all over her were huge red welts, really big. So if you think of a giraffe, when you see a giraffe at a distance, see those big brown patches, sort of like that all over? Imagine those miniaturized a bit and added on all over your body, and then raise them up by about 1 millimeter, and it's really bright red. All like that over her. I'd never seen anything like that before. I said, Daddy, I'm having an allergic reaction. Difficulty breathing. Let's go to the toilet, which was only just where that camera is there, and inject me with the EpiPen, adrenaline auto injector. Oh my gosh, absolutely right. Quickly flagged down the air hostess, said, this is what we're about to do, basically. Got up, we went to the toilet, and in 7 seconds, we're both cramped into the most miniature space possible, because two people can't really fit in a toilet. But anyway, had to close the door from a privacy point of view. And I injected Natasha through her clothes into her thigh, counted down 1 to 10. 10 to 1, I should say, backwards. Knowing that I'd seen the video, this is what you do, and adrenaline should be it should be the thing that reverses the reaction. Certainly that's how Tanya and I, husband and wife, have always been led to believe by all our doctors and any kind of chitter-chatter amongst anyone that this is the life-saving thing. This is the insurance policy. This stick with a needle in it, basically. I thought, great, thank God we've got this, I thought. Just to come back to help you understand who I am and that situation, because you have to get into that situation to really grasp it. I'm someone who does like to have control of stuff, and naturally, kind of like a boss person. If you do that, and it's all going to work out, because that's my mind, the way it works. At that point, I felt very in control. I thought, this is great, this is going to work, etc., etc. Of course, I'm worried for my daughter, whose face is about here. She looks really concerned, having difficulty breathing. But I did not think anything would go further than what you just heard so far. And she said, Daddy, I can't breathe. Get the second EpiPen. Oh, God. I ran back to her seat, because if you are food allergic, you should always have 2 EpiPens on you all times, wherever you are. And grabbed the second one and injected her, count her back. Thinking, great, looking at her, talking to her, come on, you can make this through. In this miniature toilet, and we really hunched up. And then she just slumped forward, and before she did that, she said, Daddy, help me. I can't breathe. And those were the last words she spoke to. Last living words as she slumped, and I caught her from the toilet seat. I lifted her out, took her onto the jump seat, just literally around in the galley. Pushed her with one hand like that against her body, because it was just slumped that she was now unconscious. Stop it falling onto the floor, her body falling on the floor. And with the other hand, gesticulated to the air steward who was serving food, from the galley, pulling out those trolleys, etc. Get me an oxygen tank now, I said. Within seconds, they'd got me the tank. I put it onto her face. She's unconscious now. And they turned it up. I grabbed the can, that big oxygen tank, and turned it on max volume. And at this point, I remember thinking, just go to basic physics, A-level physics. Great, I've got pressurized oxygen. It's going force-fed, being forced down her throat. So the throat's narrowing down like that. So the tube, piece of plumbing, was narrowing down. I can't get a volume down there, but the pure oxygen might offset it. So little did I think, actually, it was going to get significantly worse. And it just looked terrible. The situation looked terrible. The air stewardess were going, just all looking at me, going like that. And I was like still in charge by default, if you like. One hand holding my child's body against the wall like that, so it just wouldn't drop. And then I said, God's sake, I said, call for a doctor, see if on a tunnel. They did, and within probably a minute, this young guy, who looks honestly like one of you guys, super young guy, you know, as it were, just showed up. I said, hi, I just finished, I think it might have been in Southampton, actually, to be honest. I just finished yesterday, did my last exam, my last medics exam, and I'm on the plane just having a holiday to celebrate. And I said, well, this is what's happened. I blurbed in really quick what happened. We lay her down, we started CPR immediately in mouth to mouth. Now, this went on for the best part of 45 minutes as the plane was flying. And it was just unbelievable to see my child unconscious, her face twice the size, lips all peeled back. And the air stewards were starting to cry, were standing around crying, didn't know what to do. This young doctor, I'm using you as an example, someone's like caught in this middle of this massive theatrical moment, wondering almost what to do. There was adrenaline on the plane, but in a vial. Now, you know this, that legally all planes have to carry adrenaline, but it's cheaper to have it in a vial than it is to have it in an EpiPen. But you tell me what GP knows what to draw out in a vial, and they don't. And they just therefore kind of don't do it because they're concerned about injecting too much, perhaps. Anyway, so that wasn't used. The plane starts coming to land. It's been like 45 minutes now. It's horrific. I was thinking, I'm talking to her all the time with a raised voice, so like this, hoping she would hear me, telling her to keep the fight. Come on, you can do it. I've seen you win the school races. With your asthma, I've seen you win the races. You paid for it later, but you were absolutely going to win it, and you did it. Fight, girl, come on. The plane landed, and as soon as it landed, everybody was off-boarded from the back of the plane, so I never even saw like 120 people leave. And the paramedics walked in from the front, and they got to work straight away. I speak fluent French, so I was able to tell them straight away in French what had happened. And they gave her such rigorous CPR. It turned out they broke every rib in her chest from excessive CPR. It was a hot day. We're talking the 17th of July, really hot on the tarmac, the heat coming off the tarmac, the doors open, we're all sweltering. The three paramedics were dripping in sweat as they took over in turns. One after the other to keep going, trying to put a tube down her throat. Wasn't working because her throat was totally closed up, gone solid. Nothing was passing through, basically. I was holding a drip in his hand like that. I was talking to her constant, come on. The pilot is in front of me in his doorway, that aperture, that little doorway, and he's weeping and crying, basically, as our the stewardess and a steward are crying at both ends. And it's like a nightmare, absolutely bloody nightmare. I say that because it really was, I just couldn't believe what all this was going on. But I still was talking to her that you could come through this. She looked unrecognizable. She was so swollen and bloated, her eyes sockets were open, and because she'd vomited from being forced with so much CPR, everything she'd eaten in that dreaded sandwich had come up, and it was all red. And it had filled her eye sockets completely. And I was concerned about the stomach acid burning her corneas and her etc. and potentially blinding her. And then suddenly, as I'm holding this here, and I'm holding the door frame like that, and when I'm talking to her, she just had, like where my feet are, basically. And the paramedics are where you are, there, Suddenly, everything just boiled down. Literally just went like that. Her body was there, as it was, just as I'm seeing you now. No different, but as it was there. But everything around was edited out, complete, and filmed with a yellow light, a bright but soft yellow light. A light that doesn't make you go like this, but it's powerful light. Just everything I could see was all yellow light. And hovering above her, I saw 5 angels. They were like people. I would describe them with wings, from her feet at this end on the left to her head at that end, in the galley, left to right, off the top of the plane, hovering above her, different levels across her. I was so taken aback by what I saw. I'd never seen anything like that. And I was pretty much we don't drink much. I've certainly never done any form of drugs or take any kind of medication, for that matter, for any health reasons. I was so taken aback, and it just dawned on me and what that might mean. It just related to me like a film, like you'd watch a film on telly when that might happen. Oh my God, she's going to die. Why else would I see that? And with this hand, I just whooshed them away and shouted, "It's not her time." And as I did that, everything came back into view. The light was gone, the angels were gone. She was there. And the heart monitor they'd rigged up to her probably about 15 minutes earlier had flatlined. And she was gone. It's okay. So taken aback by that, I think. And then really became a question of taking her body off the plane, basically, in one of those stretcher things. But that's what happened. I remember it so vividly because I've never seen anything like that before. And I actually wrote about that the next day, what happened. And I emailed that story, what you heard from me just now, to all my employees in the company. They never spoke to me about it, but it's another thing. But it's really, really powerful vision. That's what happened.
Dean, that's an extraordinary story, and of course each of us in this room feel the intensity of that pain, and we're so sorry for that loss of Natasha. The vision of angels, and you weren't a religious man.
No.
As you even now look back on that time, how do you process and try to understand now as someone who is a Christian what was happening in that vision?
Well, I now process it, I have processed it, I should say, as someone now having come to faith. So that's who I am, what I am now. It was not then. Is that God knows us all individually, myself included. Not that I ever thought that at the time, you just heard from me. But he knows us all so well and knows us actually what we need and what it takes for us, each of us, to do something or achieve something or whatever it is, to perhaps even convince us of something. And I put it down that God knew exactly what it would take for someone like me, my type of person, who I was. As you perhaps heard a few words when I first sat down, the kind of person I was. What it would take for me to change paths, basically. Essentially, for me ultimately come to faith. Yes. But what it would take for me to take something on board, given who I am. And he showed me that vision, basically, as a way of saying, it's okay. She's coming with me. Yeah, so that was the beginning. A moment of God's reassurance to you. Reassurance not in just that moment. Like, I can say it, I thought, it wasn't like a road to Damascus moment where I was blinded and I had to wipe the scales off my eyes or whatever, but it was very much it was the stepping stones up the ladder or up the stairs of a journey to what became short years later when I came to faith and was actually baptized underwater. It was certainly the journey necessary for someone like me, and simply want to realize my story is not unique. There may even be some amongst you or your friends or colleagues or family who have stories of incredible visions, but they've perhaps never even shared it. As I've discovered, people often don't, actually. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nadim. So after Natasha's death, you had not been to church before that time, ever?
I think the only time I set foot in a church was for a wedding, or certainly a funeral, and a kind of Catholic funeral back then, which like grandparents, for example, or uncles and French Catholic funerals. They really go on and on, very structured and so forth. That was my only experience of any form of walking into a church-like building.
But Natasha had been going to church.
Yes, that's right. So semi-unbeknown to me, and I say that not because my family was hiding it from me, but it's more because I just wasn't interested, and they probably didn't talk to me about it. But Natasha had been going to church in Wimbledon, which is something more evangelical-esque church, rather than a straight, perhaps Anglican church, if you like, just to give you that nuance. But going on a Friday night to youth groups, this might mean something to you, those youth groups, with her best friend Bethany, who was on the plane with me when her best friend had died. And then she'd been going also on some Sundays as well. But for me, I wasn't even really acknowledging that because I wasn't interested at all, to be honest. It's like, whatever, etc. As I've mentioned before, that's who I was. When I would go traveling, just to understand that around the world, in the 90s and early 2000s, when you'd go to a hotel in Tokyo, wherever, Brazil, whichever countries I was in, and you always find a Gideon's, that means the name of Gideon's,
A Bible in a drawer.
and it's moving out. And the first thing I do, I walked into my room, look it over, see that little book or Bible, chuck it in a drawer and slam the drawer closed. That's how interested I was in religion. So I really wasn't acknowledging in any way consciously that Natasha was finding a faith, before she died.
But she was a Christian, you think?
Yes, so after she died, we heard more about Natasha's faith because it was talked about more. And Bethany, whose father is a pastor, actually, Bethany told us that her and Natasha had been talking 2 weeks before Natasha died, that she wanted to get baptized. And she did have a faith and so on. So she'd really come on her own journey. Nothing to do with me, certainly. Perhaps a little bit, maybe to do with Tanya, a little bit, but nothing to do with me. And she had a faith, and she wanted to get baptized, and she did believe in Jesus. I know that. We know that for a fact, because people have told us.
That's a wonderful truth to know that you'll see her again.
It is, actually. I think it is generally a real comfort to know that this meal is not the last supper for us. There's great food also come the time somewhere else about maybe technical food as well. So in that sense, I know definitely because of my faith that I will absolutely, and my wife Tanya as well, we will find Natasha again in heaven, and we'll find that great joy and none of the troubles and the food allergies and all those things that she had here in this physical and broken world. Yeah.
So maybe just get a little sip of water, Nadim. So after Natasha's passing, you go to church for the first time other than a funeral or a wedding in sort of a higher Catholic church. And what made you go? And what did you find that kept you going?
But I can't say it was like a super conscious decision to go, that I've got to go to church. It's not that sort of thing. I've got to go somewhere or do something. It was very much. So we brought Natasha's body back in a sealed lead coffin, a transport coffin, which is legal requirement in the plane. Just so there's one space in every aeroplane for a coffin. And it's roughly under the rows 1 and 2 under the feet on an Airbus, just so you know. We found that out. And her body was offloaded at Heathrow Friday night, basically. And on Sunday, so 48 hours later, I found myself with Tanya at church, at her church, that is Natasha's church, for the first time ever, surrounded by what would be probably about 200-300 people. Yeah. Faces of all ethnicities, ages, etc., all knowing what happened. We'd been praying on that Sunday when the news broke in church for her life to be saved. And they just all wrapped themselves around me and Tanya. But talking in my experience, all these people, like you actually, all your lovely faces, etc., people, all broken selves, actually. All broke, some alcoholics, some, issues around drugs and addictions and family breakdowns, and some, not like that. But all showering me with their love. And that was such an effect on me. because I'd never had that in my life before from people I didn't know. Normally for me, life was, I want to do something for you. What are you going to do for me? It's a transaction. If you think of business, it is a transaction. Most things I have to do is, you sell something, you get something back, etc. That was really my experience around relationships and en masse people, really. And all of these people, you were offering something for nothing, which was their love and their compassion. And I found that overwhelming and super comforting.
And what kept you going? Was it the people that you were meeting and then evident of love? Or how did Jesus start to make himself real to you?
So I think it's quite simple, really. Yes, of course, there was a background, as I said, that love and that compassion and that real care. But the bit I did that was more poignant, I think, for me, was, remember, I'd always never looked at the Bible. I don't think I'd ever even opened the Bible ever in my life, just to be clear, right? Any kind of Bible. And at this time, in this church, the pastor, who was at the front, would actually not just read the Bible, but actually decode it, unpack it, those words that you use, or something explained. Let's just put it that way. Explain, different parts of the Bible, which to me, I'd always thought was some old-fashioned book that was irrelevant, talked about farming and sheep. What had that got to do with today? When we had, by then, Apple computers and everything else. It seemed entirely irrelevant to me, that book. But as he spoke, week after week, and we went every week for several years, certainly in the early months, I actually began to really engage with the way he spoke about what the meaning was of different books. About Matthew this and Luke that and so on and so on. And I found it really engaging in my quiet brokenness, often weeping, I should say, like a miserable wreck, just bubbling and crying in church a lot. So broken and so in grief, healthy grief. But what I did see was, and again, testament to a great pastor perhaps, or at least God working through the pastor, was that actually I saw myself in what I was hearing about the explanation of the Bible. I saw myself as living in that old book, but the book was so relevant to today. So it could swap the sheep for something else. I could swap this, could swap out the different terms and is eventually for slightly more modern setting. And it all made sense. And I realized, oh gosh, I was just like those broken people 2,000 years ago, doing this and doing that. And I really began to see how, like a jigsaw puzzle, was coming together a bit more. And the whole narrative and the story, and I would call now the logic of the Bible, in the broken world, Jesus coming, all starts to make sense. And because I saw myself in it, that's what kept me going, because I wanted to know more and more.
So that book became alive to you.
That book became alive. That's absolutely right. From something that was essentially dead to me, effectively, it flipped and became alive. I think that's right.
Was there a specific moment when you say you became a Christian, a follower of Jesus, or was it just that gradual process over those years of that pastor opening up that Bible?
I wouldn't say there was one moment. I can't say that. I think moment in church. It was gradual, and I would call it again like a gradual washing of my human broken soul. Really, very broken. I mean, I was suicidal, and twice thought that if I killed myself, it was logical because I would then go after and find my daughter wherever she'd gone into the darkness, and logic was that I would be gone from this earth. And Tanya, my wife, and our son would be here. But one of us, so it was on me as a man, as a father, the man who's supposed to provide, eventually the family. That was, my thinking at the time, would go and find my child, basically. And so imagine going from that broken, suicidal state. I had very bad PTSD, I should say, from witnessing my child die and being entirely helpless around it. I went into a place of where I actually could live again, basically, and forgive myself, because I blamed myself for what happened. What kind of man, what kind of pathetic man at the time lets his child die in front of him and can't do something about it? Remember, I came from the place of, I do it in my strength, my soul, my will, at that time. And this sort of got washed away bit by bit. Forgiveness came in. And I was able to look at myself or live with myself. And even later, to forgive other people that I actually blamed. If some of you know more about the story in the press, forgive the people who ran the company, as well, who I blamed for the death of my child for what they had done wrong.
Nadine, were you angry with God that he had let it happen?
It's important to be honest. I come here to be entirely honest. I was really angry with God. So within the first year, you've heard about this gentle washing. The flip side of pain, great pain, is unregulated anger, huge anger that just overwhelmed me. So much so that you take a gun out, just shoot someone. I mean, really, the anger is so overwhelming. And that anger was so destructive, extraordinarily destructive for me, of course, and also my family, Tanya and Alex, and even my mum and dad and my mother-in-law, and for my friends. It just meant I couldn't regulate, I couldn't do anything. And it was so angry that I used to swear a lot. I won't say the words, but you probably know those words, kind of typical, lots of them. I was belting him out at the top of my voice, blaming God for everything, saying, "How could you do this?" And swearing his name, full on, basically. Nothing held back. Blamed him entirely. But that dialed down, through going to church. I mean, being immersed in the love, I think, that God was bringing through to me, basically, and helping me overcome, basically. I was so broken and so weak. I was what I would have called pathetic in my former self. Now I just call it entirely broken as a human being.
You may have questions that you want to ask Nadim in that question and answer time. Thank you for your vulnerability, Nadim. Thank you for your honesty and you sense that raw emotion that still lives in you. But you've also, as well as finding faith in Jesus Christ that has sustained you and turned you through this devastating experience, you've also tried to work and campaign for a change in the law. And maybe you tell us a little bit about that and the Natasha Allergy Research Foundation and the work that you do now.
Yeah, so, lives are very different now, through faith and having a totally different view of the world. So go from doing things that only benefited me and running a business, being successful, making money, whatever, however you want to couch it, you go that way to the flip side, which is all about helping other people. And there are around 4 million people with food allergies in the UK. Vast majority of those are children and teenagers. And I kind of people your age, and there are, of course, adults as well, but the majority of, I say older adults, so when I say, you look so young, I don't know how to eat. I just know they're now 8-year-olds with you. Yeah. So it's really, we help. So in 2019, after the inquest into the death of our child, which was much publicized across TV, etc., Tanya and I, we felt we were at a crossroads, really, whether to go back into the shadows of what we call broken people, basically, which is quite normal, really, and just try and live on, or to come out and try and help others. And I think that she's very much would say that God gave us those choices and helped us go that way, which is to help others in a big way, in a really big way. And we started to campaign for Natasha's Law, which was quite an effort. And Natasha's Law passed through Parliament in 2019 and became law across the whole of the UK in 2021, which is all about food laws. It changed everything for pretty much every company that does anything with food in the United Kingdom to adapt to new laws. And then set up a big clinical trial at Southampton Uni. Is the head management point of it. However, it's across 9 big hospitals, Aberdeen, Edinburgh, and 7 in the UK all the way down, to treat 300 young people for their food allergies using the very food they're allergic to as the actual solution. So no pharmaceuticals, It's all about using food as the solution for your health rather than drugs. And that's going well. That was £2.7 million. We funded that. And then we launched another big thing at Allergy School just recently. And the King came out in support. Keir Starmer spoke about it in Parliament. And that's an entirely free, again, £1 million project that went out to 21,000 schools to help, if your children, help the teachers understand you as food allergic people in their care better and what and how to do. So we're very much couch it as God is our CEO, basically. But we are blessed, Tanya and I, to have 15 staff in a small charity, 15 employees in the charity. And we're surrounded by great people, great trustees, etc. from charity. But God leads us, essentially, in the way that we need to go to have big impact, essentially, and to solve, we hope, this problem for the sake of humanity, really, so that people need no longer die from eating simple foods, or have these allergies. And the King is really backing us, as are many big companies, around the UK, all big names you all know, high street food companies, etc. So blessed to be able to cut through incredibly and achieve quite a lot in a short time, because he upstairs, God is with us and he's leading us through. And we, just so you know, I mean, it's worth saying this actually, but otherwise it might not come out. Tanya and I, we do pray before every meeting, before we meet the ministers, before we meet the big bosses of the very, very big food companies, giants, real giants, and others, for God to come into the space, lead us, go ahead, prepare the ground, and soften their hearts for what we have to say. And it's remarkable how I can only say it's like when you sit down here in front of someone who runs a 10 or 20 billion pound company. It's like sometimes having a hot knife through the butter. You can't believe it's done so quickly. You think, how did that happen? And I think putting God into it, allowing to go into and asking, and to go in, it gives it everything a whole different, not just feel, but a different outcome, essentially. And that's it. It's again and again and again. These are not one-off things.
Indeed, I've got so many questions, but time has gone. But we have time to ask those a little bit later on and in the evening. One last question, if I may. A lot of people here tonight would be agnostic or atheist like you, never looked at a Bible or been to a church or anything else, but have experienced suffering one way or another, maybe to a lesser degree than you, but nevertheless it's in all of our lives, isn't it? What would you say to anyone in that situation based on your story?
What do you think? So you've heard, everything I've told you is 100% true. I'm not making this up anywhere. Why would I? I don't really get paid for it or anything. So it's nothing, I don't want to be like a fool either. So I have to say the truth. That I know I can sleep well tonight because exactly what I told you happened. So I would say to anyone who's kind of a little bit doubtful, gosh, well, just like me back in the days. If you're even more doubtful, well, you're even more like I was back then. But you can perhaps see through what I've told you, which is the truth, and a harrowing family story with all of you largely at some point, give or take, will probably have children at some point. And you'll know what that feels like, and to bury your child is like the worst thing you can ever do. So I've come through this, you see me now, basically, the transformation is possible. But I would say, why wait? Why defer it? Perhaps listen to what I said. Listen to other people who are like me, and there are other people like me in this world. You just have to maybe look them up a bit, maybe, be inquisitive. And I don't hang on, because life in this world, as we all know, is broken. Every one of us is going to suffer horrific trauma, through one way or another is coming, just because we are finite in this world. And if we don't believe in something else beyond this, it's even much more painful to think it's the end, as I was before. Knowing it's not the end, actually, is dramatic change. Knowing that it's not the end. It changes everything for the way you live the life here. It makes it way better. Weirdly, it's true. It makes it just way better. It nuances everything about what you do, how you speak with people you do and don't know, and makes their lives better. And conversely, also makes your life better as well. Just more joyful, actually. Not to say you'll be happy, laughing every minute. There will be, great strains on you, for like there's for all of us. But you will cope with them so much better, so much better. And I have to say, just one last word. We know 50 families since our daughter died. 50 families have contacted us since then, whose children have also died in the UK from food allergies. And go and meet them from a pastoral point of view, not from the work of the charity, because we're all about science. We're about science and education. That is our mandate, effectively. But from a human perspective, we go to their homes, wherever they live in the country. Doesn't matter. We sit with them and hold their hands as they weep for the loss of their child. And we know the one families that don't have faith, and there are many that don't, fare far worse basic outcomes of what happens next than those that do have faith, basically. And so I'd say, if you want to have a much better life, flip the switch, be inquisitive. That's all I'd say. I don't no hassle, no pressure. Just be inquisitive. And just see if it doesn't work for you after a year, okay, hands up. But I know it will work for you, so you've got nothing to lose.
Tanya, Nadim, thank you so much. Natasha is with us by her spirit, and she is immensely proud of what you have done with what was a devastating experience to bless so many countless hundreds and thousands of lives and to point people to a Saviour in Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for making the trip, and thank you for all that you've shared with us.
Thank you. Thank you for listening so diligently. And it's hard not to make much noise with cutlery, so thank you for listening. I appreciate your ears, Divine. Thank you.
We show our appreciation. You should find some copies of John's Gospel. And it was very striking, Nadim's story of how when he first started to visit a church, he found that what was a dead book became a living book because he encountered himself in the stories that were being read. So we're going to look at one of those stories very briefly in just a few minutes, but a story that in so many ways parallels the one that we just heard from Nadim. So if you, maybe along with your neighbor, you might have enough of these to share one between two there. John's Gospel's on your table. Would you mind turning to page 28? And I hope it will become a living book for us tonight, that as we read a little bit of this story, it will resonate not only with Nadim's stories, but with your own. I don't know how you related to what we've just heard, or whether you could describe in your own life a moment where life made no sense whatsoever. Maybe you lost something, or you lost someone, maybe not in such a dramatic and extraordinary, painful way as Nadim and Tanya, but nevertheless that led you to ask, why didn't God do something? Why did God do something? We heard Nadim's story, his daughter Natasha taken so suddenly, leaving him wrestling with that kind of a question. And in John chapter 11, we're going to hear the story briefly of two sisters who wanted Jesus to do something, and yet he didn't, or not in the way that they expected or wished for. The two ladies, the sisters, are called Mary and Martha, and they face a similar kind of crisis because their brother is desperately, desperately ill. His name is Lazarus. And they knew Lazarus was sick. In fact, he was so sick that they realized unless Jesus came quickly, he might not live. And they sent for Jesus, the one that they believed could heal him, because we're about halfway through this gospel and Jesus already has a powerful testimony as a healer, and people around the whole region would send sick and dying people to Jesus to have him heal them. And so they send for Jesus at the beginning of the story. And yet, Jesus doesn't come. I don't know quite how many miles away he is. But the question that they are left asking when he finally does come is, why didn't you come sooner? So John chapter 11, we realize that Lazarus is ill, and verse 3, they send word to Jesus. They send someone quickly, go and find Jesus and tell him, verse 3, Lord, the one you love is ill. That's the little number 3 there at the bottom of page 28. Lord, the one you love is ill. Faced with a desperate situation, they knew two things. Jesus loved their brother. They already knew each other. He wasn't a stranger to Jesus. They knew each other. They knew that Jesus loved Lazarus, and they also knew that Jesus had the power to heal Lazarus. Those were the two things that they knew that gave them great hope. Jesus loved Lazarus, and Jesus could heal Lazarus. So naturally, they expect Jesus to rush over, heal their brother, and put everything right. But look at the little number 6 there, towards the bottom of page 28. But verse 6 says something truly shocking. So, when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. I mean, imagine being an ambulance driver and you get a call, an emergency call to get somebody quickly to save a life, and you decide to stay where you are. You're not going to go. You're not going to answer the call. It seems like that kind of a moment. Verse 6, the one that Jesus loves is sick, so Jesus stayed where he was for 2 more days. And in fact, by the time Jesus made it, I guess he waited there for 2 days, and then it was 2 days to walk to where he needed to be. By the time he actually got there, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Buried, mourned over, gone. And when Martha meets Jesus, verse 21 there on page 29, when Martha meets him first, she simply says this, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. I mean, that's the obvious thing for her to say, isn't it? If you'd been here, things would have turned out so differently. Martha says it in verse 21, and then Mary says exactly the same thing when she first sees Jesus in verse 32. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. You can hear the pain, can't you, in that kind of statements. You can sense the utter bewilderment and confusion over why Jesus didn't come. Jesus, where were you when we needed you? It's raw, it's honest. They're not accusing Jesus outright, but the question hangs in the air. Maybe you felt that too, wondering, God, where are you? Why won't you come? Jesus responds, well, we don't have time to look at it in much detail this evening, but Jesus doesn't give them a lecture to explain why he had to come or why he delayed. Instead, verse 33, when Jesus saw Mary weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And then verse 35, we have the shortest verse in the whole of the Bible. Jesus wept. He wept. Alongside these 2 women who had lost their brother, he cries with them. He feels their pain. Nadim told us of how alone he felt on that plane watching Natasha slip away. And yet he saw that vision of angels. There was a sense in which God was speaking to him in that moment. And for Mary and Martha, it's Jesus himself who steps into their story and into their pain. He doesn't dismiss their questions. He joins them as his tears meet their tears. That's who Jesus is, full of compassion. He doesn't give them the why, but he gives them himself. At the heart of the claim of Christianity is that God became one of us, that God isn't there distantly above the whole universe, like a little child with a magnifying glass burning ants in the heat of the sun, but is a God that steps into our pain and into our world, and by becoming one of us knows every emotion that you will experience in this life and that I experience in your darkest moments. Maybe you've wondered whether God is actually there with you. But Jesus doesn't just stop at tears. He then asks them to take him to the tomb. And Martha warns him, verse 39, Lord, by this time there's a bad odor, for he's been there 4 days. While Lazarus was alive, she had hope that Jesus could do something. But now that Lazarus is dead, it seems as if it's game over. I mean, what could Jesus do for her brother now he's dead for 4 days? Death is the end, right? I mean, we all know that, don't we? Yet Jesus says something staggering, verse 40. 40. Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Then he prays and calls out, Lazarus, come out. And this man, so certainly dead, walks out of his tomb alive. Can you imagine Mary and Martha's faces at this moment? 1 minute they're overcome by grief, the next they have their brother back. See, Jesus doesn't just comfort us in our suffering and pain. Jesus conquers it by defeating death. Nadim didn't get Natasha back that day, but he found a true and certain hope that he will one day be reunited with her, and they will be together more alive than they've ever been in this world. You see, John chapter 11 of verse 25 is Jesus' big claim. This is the heart of everything in the whole story, verse 25. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. It's said it over every burial at every Christian funeral. You will live, even though you die. That's not a promise just for Lazarus. It's not just a promise for Natasha, for Tanya and Nadim. That's a promise for you and me if we have put our trust in Jesus Christ. The philosopher Bertrand Russell famously said, when I die, I rot. As an atheist, that was it for him. When I die, I rot. But Jesus has just blown that myth out of the water. Maybe you came along this evening pretty convinced in your own mind that death was the end. But now we've heard 2 remarkable stories. One from Nadim and one from Lazarus. And maybe you were starting to reconsider that thought that death may not be the end. And you know, Jesus delayed his arrival for people like you and like me. He delayed his coming so that we might be absolutely sure and certain that death is not the end. The story hints as early as verse 4 when Jesus says, on hearing that Lazarus is sick, in verse 4 he says, this sickness will not end in death. It involves death, but it won't end in death because it is for God's glory. His delay, in other words, wasn't going to be neglect. It was to show something greater than Jesus' ability to heal the sick. It was to give you and me confidence, certainty that the grave does not win and death is not the end. By waiting, we see the extraordinary reality that Jesus has power over death itself. So Nadim's tragedy led to Natasha's law and the saving, no doubt, of many lives and to his own coming to faith. Mary and Martha's pain led to a miracle that pointed you and me to Jesus as the one who can rescue us from death. Maybe your unanswered why questions are part of something bigger too. Something you can't see yet, but he can. Mary and Martha's question, why didn't you come sooner? Actually, in the end, brought them to a much deeper and bigger understanding of who Jesus really is. Martha still says, I believe you're the Messiah, the Son of God, even before Lazarus rises. But by the end of the story, they are sure of who he is. Jesus is the one who weeps with us in our pain. Jesus is the one who faced death himself on the cross. And Jesus is the one who didn't just raise Lazarus to life, but who conquered death himself and lives forevermore. So he didn't raise Lazarus to impress a crowd. He did it that we might know who he is, that he has the power over death, and to invite us into that same story. Whoever lives by believing in me will never die, Jesus says. And then he says to Mary and Martha, do you believe this? That's the question to Mary and Martha, the question to Nadim, the question to you, and the question to me. So maybe you are, as Nadim put it, just a little curious to think maybe death is not the end. Or you're just wondering, is Jesus real? Is he here tonight? Is he closer than I ever thought he was? Well, Jesus isn't put up by your questions. And he invites you to take that next step towards him. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to invite Nadim to come back to the front.
Let's start with you, Nadim. The first question that's come up is one that I had on my mind as well as you were telling your story, which is that Bethany was also there, was part of it. And it'd be lovely to hear more about her. How is she now and her own faith?
Well, so that's a really good question. So Bethany was 14, and when she saw her best friend die, she had a strong faith, strong Christian faith, came from a strong Christian family, 4 girls, all blondes, literally just a little bit older than each other, like that. Mum and dad, who again, very strong Christian faith. It was very bad for her, so you can imagine what happened. She struggled for a good while, a number of years afterwards, friendship groups at school. Of course, had a really supportive family back home. But I think, even with her faith, she knew that struggle to make sense of it. She's just so young, It's not something any child should witness, really. But her faith always remained strong, really did remain strong. We know that because we know her well. We see her, seen her often enough since then. And she went to Nottingham University, did a degree in biology, did well, and she always through university went to sort of CU, Christian Union, if that's makes sense, and church, and found her church, the right church there, where she met Tom, her future husband, who's also had a strong faith. His father committed suicide just as he was going through A-levels. It really impacted him. And together, as someone, Bethany had lost her best friend and Tom had lost his father, they found each other through church. And they got married at age 22 in a fabulous wedding. And they are so happy together and so strong, really. Incredible. So she's in a really good place now. She wasn't at the beginning, but happy to say she's very grounded, strong faith, and actually now wants to even play a part in the charity as well to help other people. So good news.
Thank you for sharing it. And there's a couple of questions here that it might be interesting to take together. One is asking, I guess, in a way, the fair question. Could your faith be wishful thinking? Because I guess it's understandable in such a tragic situation like that. We want to reach for anything that will bring comfort. And it sounds very clear like it has. And the next question, which I guess links with that, is what actually made you choose to follow Jesus? Is there any reason, rationale behind it, beyond just, I hope this is the case because I want to cling on to something right now? Perhaps, Nadim, would you mind speaking to that first? And I recognise for you, Neil, you're kind of professional in your work as a Christian, so hopefully there's some good reason for why you do that. You can add in that too.
And not money. Well, it's a good question, and it's a fair one to answer. My best friends, even, who I grew up, I still know. I was with them in the Highlands of going to Hope this weekend, and I've known them since the age of 6, basically. And they would ask me the same question because they're all quite sort of non-believers, atheists, if you like. I would say, I know what I saw, and that's not the only. This is the other thing. It's not apparent. Other things have happened as well since then, through just being so broken and calling out really to God for help. A number of things. And so it's not a one-off event. That was really what you'd call the first event, effectively. But Tanya and I have both experienced other things that are so unbelievable and unexplainable other than the supernatural effect. The supernatural being not a bad word, just in case we've been taking that the wrong way. Supernatural, God's hand, the hand of Jesus coming through, really, literally through, and and holding you up, basically. And I've seen your prophecies come true. I've had some very strong visions around forgiveness, and found myself just following through on them very publicly. With many people witnessing, and actually forgiving the man that I blamed for killing my child, and telling him publicly, I do this because I know you are my father yourself, and you have 2 children, 2 daughters. And if I do not forgive you, you cannot be the best father to the daughters. And you must be released from that burden so your children, can live the best life possible. There have been many moments that have come out of this. It's not just the angel thing. That was the first. And I know it's all very, Christian, God-led, very Jesus coming in, because I've had much, I would say, at what feels like one-on-one time with Jesus and him coming through to me, as indeed many others have and do all the time, etc. But I've really felt it very strongly, and can say that, when you're that broken and you call out, he comes. He really does come. He does answer, and has answered for me time and time again.
Neil, would you be up for speaking to that too?
So I think what Nadim is giving testimony to is the power of a transformed life. And we've heard that in so many of his answers, an utterly extraordinary transformation through an extremely desperate and tragic story. It's a miracle. Your life is a walking miracle in so many ways. But alongside that power to that God has to change us from the inside out, there are also some hard facts of history that we can look to as well. And that I'd encourage you to do if you are curious to think about these things, because what Nadim saw was that vision of the angelic beings that is a personal and in one sense a subjective experience. No one else saw it, is what I mean by that. And yet, when Jesus himself died, many people saw him bodily resurrected from the dead as a fact of history. So it's not simply a question of feelings or emotions or what I see in my mind or a dream or those things, even though I think that can be valid testimony to the work of God, as Nadim has taught us this evening. But the Apostle Paul says this when he speaks to a group of Greek philosophers in the city of Athens. He said, God has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. It's a very striking choice of language. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising Jesus from the dead. And there's something like 500 witnesses, eyewitnesses to the physical resurrected Jesus Christ in history. And that's something that you're free to go and investigate. We would encourage you to be curious, to open that drawer next time you're in a hotel, or ideally just taking one of these away tonight and reading the evidence of history.
Thank you. I really appreciate that tone of encouraging curiosity. I think that's really helpful. And several people wanted to ask Nadim about your wife Tanya, who's joined tonight, and
she's my lovely wife there. Without her, I would be, a lot less than I am now.
It'd be wonderful to hear about her own journey of faith as well, whether that happened alongside the same time as you or at a different moment.
Yeah, so try and answer that. But yeah, so really I would say, it's a topic. Past fact that I was really paying no attention in that time, some years back, to anything much going around me at the time around faith. I think I've said that, so hold that in thought. But Tanya's did grow up with certainly more faith than me, if you like, broadly speaking. I think Tanya's mum was originally from Orthodox Church, a Russian Orthodox Church. So though her mother was not really following, but Tanya did have some nascent faith throughout all the years. And that came more towards the end, didn't it? So like we go to church with Natasha on Sundays for about 6 months, suddenly before Natasha died, etc. And being amazed as well, I think you put it, at how wonderful the experience of church was, how you felt the presence really of Jesus in that time of church. So Tanya's wasn't committed Christian, if you like, and I was a complete denier. It wasn't like black and white, all the way through it. Anyway, it was a sort of nascent belief in faith in God, with Jesus, whereas mine was zero. And at some point we met, which was really after Natasha died, and I came very strongly to faith, really, and quite sort of perhaps a little bit evangelical about it. I think that's often the case, as it were. And and now we are really aligned, if that's the right word, aligned. Both people, similar strong faith, ready to, I say die for it. Well, it'd be like that. We can't. You'd hold a gun to my head, for example, to say that what I've told you tonight is not true, for example.
It's great to hear a joint story together. Yeah. And I think we've all really appreciated your tone of honesty tonight, including speaking about the feeling of anger that you had towards God and towards others. And there's a really helpful question here, I guess picking up on particularly anger directed towards God. It says, was that anger and pain a barrier to being inquisitive of the Bible? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Well, I think anger, when it's so overbearing, it's so destructive. I don't know if anyone can think of a time when anger has been constructive, but I can't certainly. But it's so destructive that you can't hear or see anything anymore. And it becomes, you just start to break everything around you, and particularly people, is what I mean, not so much objects. So you are so it's so raging, basically. And you can't really be touched by much in that time. I think it's when the anger is not there. So the troughs, shall we say, when you come down at the quiet time, if you like, because you can't be angry 100%. I mean, it's impossible as an emotion. It rises fast, very violent, then it ebbs away before it comes back again, as it masks the pain of grief. But it's going to church and being around people, other people, essentially, with faith, that I can see you, I can relate to you, you're a human being, I can believe in you, even in my non-faith, etc. And being folded into the dough, really like the yeast being folded into the dough to make some great focaccia bread at the end of the day. That's how I would put it, really. Something very tasty, meaningful. And that's who I was, really. And the teaching, I think, is really important for me. I got from the church, at my church, from the pastor, because if I didn't understand the Bible or hadn't really, had it explained to me, for months, if not years, as it were, I would never have really probably been someone through anger to open it in the first place. So it was really key for me, I think, in my journey to have that root, for me. I think God put me on that path, send me to an Anglican church, a very Anglican church, like a 400-year-old stone church where it's very, very sort of set piece and perhaps less learning, at least for my type of personality. And so the church we're in today, so the evangelical church, just the right sort of medicine for me, the right way for me to onboard Jesus into my life. And it's worked really, really well in so.
Sharing. We've spoken quite a lot about faith tonight, haven't we? And the next question picks up on the way that you mentioned that you've started a science-based foundation. And often maybe society will think that there's a conflict there between faith and science or rationality. But it'd be really comfortable to speak to that. And how much do you find that conflict, or is there a way that they think of each other?
So it's a good question. So I'm not a perfect person to answer, but I can tell you what I feel, what I believe. So I did be honest about that. So I come from a science background, maths, physics, electronic systems. Some of you might be in a bit of that one. So, I know what keeps the flame up in the air, and I trust it implacably, the Bernoulli effect, basically pressure, etc., and so on and so on. And I really have a strong grounding belief in mechanics and how things work, etc., etc. But at the same time, I actually, and this might feel contradictory, I think it's where the question's coming from, have complete belief and faith in Genesis, basically. Which, if I think of all the things, most people, Genesis, part of the Bible, being about most people that I know, my friends, think is absolutely absurd and bonkers. For example, the people I was with just now, the last few days, I mean, they started talking about how, the Big Bang Theory, and this moon, and dark matter, all this, and I'm kind of like, okay, and there's nowhere there for Noah, no space for Noah or anything. And I don't feel well equipped enough to insert myself into that conversation, because it's just going to really get them angry, basically. And everyone will go to sleep on a holiday or in a bad mood. So I stayed out of it thinking I'm not yet equipped to be able to, talk about it. But I'm perfectly at ease with the whole story of Genesis, which before I would have thought would be beyond fantastical. I have total faith in it, basically. And at the same time, I have total faith in all my understanding of mechanics and other things that God, actually, Jesus allows us through our hands and our brains, male, female, otherwise, to build and to make in this constructed world. But I also know, like this building, it will end. This building won't last forever. It might outlast us, but it'll be gone soon enough. Just like Apple products won't be around for long. Sorry to tell you that. You know what I mean? I realise it's all temporary.
Sure. Thank you for speaking to that. Neil, I wonder if you could help us with the next question. Why Jesus and not someone else? There's lots of people that maybe are different faiths and some other sources of support. Why Jesus?
Thank you. I mean, that's such a big question. that I feel even in trying to answer it, there's a danger of being seen to be either superficial or in some sense disrespectful to other faiths and religions. So I'll be careful of what I say, and still brief so we can get some more questions in. I think essentially because no one made the claims that Jesus ever made. So Buddha, Muhammad, Confucius, Moses, you name it. No one has ever claimed to be God walking here on earth. I mean, that's an astonishing, staggering, mind-blowing claim that Jesus makes, to be God with us. So there's something remarkable about the person Jesus that no one else has even tried to claim that Jesus does. But there's also then his death and resurrection. So in other words, Jesus didn't just say, this is who I say I am, take it or leave it. He said, this is who I say I am, and I will demonstrate the reality of that claim by going to a cross to take upon himself the penalty for all of the wrong things we've ever thought, said, or done, all of the destructive forces that are within us, to take the punishment, that penalty for that upon himself, to die in our place for our sin, is the language the Bible would use for it. And yet to then rise again from the dead 3 days later, so that tomb today is empty. It is as empty today as before Jesus' body was ever put in it. So Jesus claimed to be God. He died for that claim. He didn't need to. He chose to. He claimed to be God. He died for that claim. And then his disciples claimed to have not only seen and witnessed an empty tomb, but to have met with the risen, resurrected Jesus Christ. And they themselves were willing to die for that claim that they had seen him and met with him and hugged him and eaten food with him after he had died and been buried in the tomb. And those are either facts of history or they're not, and they can be investigated. And many have down centuries, including quite a few skeptics, who've come to the conclusion, I think this makes most sense of the facts of history as they're presented to us, extraordinary as they are. So no one ever claimed to be God apart from Jesus, so that separates him really from the crowd, should we just say. And no one has ever died and claimed to have been risen from the dead. So we know that Buddha's body is in a grave, as is Muhammad's, as is Moses. And no one of those faiths claims anything other than that. They claim he's dead and buried. But Christians don't. Christians say there's something unique in human history happened on that Easter Sunday. And the question is, what do we do with that things?
Well, yeah, clearly very big claims and worth a lot of investigating. Yeah, thank you. Nadim, how easy was it to leave your previous career to start this charity that you're now working on and research that comes with that?
I think most people tend to want to cling on to things of the past because I identified my self-worth, who I was through the success of being in that company. You know, it's like a badge. It's hard to take that badge off if you're somehow invested in it, basically, and identify. You know, my identity was in that company. And seeing children in Russia or Azerbaijan, any country you can think of around the world playing with my toys, it's like, that's amazing, you know, 2-year-olds. To me, that was everything. That was a marker of my success, etc. Blah, blah, blah. You know, that's, it's all in the past, so it's irrelevant now. Reality, actually, trying to run a business to be successful as a totally broken person it doesn't really work. I don't think there's anyone I could think of in the business world of any story where there's success that way around. So you could say, the writing was on the wall. After Natasha died, I really struggled to lead a business and slowly it started to fall apart, basically. And I was going to the toilet and just crying in the toilets, basically. That's not a way a leader is. And you have to grow and work in the world of democracy and capitalism, basically. But actually, over the time, I began to dislike it. I didn't enjoy it. And also, I didn't see the meaning of it. I think it's just an important way. I didn't see the meaningfuls. Why was it fruitful? But I was doing that and so invested in that. Does it really make a difference? It's a real question. Does it really make a difference? And I think the answer was no, actually. It didn't, it didn't. And whereas everything I was learning, picking up and feeling through my, my faith-based life was like a light switching on brighter and brighter, essentially. And that all was highlighting more and more things in a land or in a world, still this one, I should say, where I could be something, but not through my own strength. Given power given to me, power flowing through me, as it has done, as it does through many people. And of course, biblically speaking, we all know that those stories flowing through me, not of my own power, but literally coming through my hands and the words given to me to say to people made such a big difference to people. And not only me, I don't mean just me repeating this story, by the way. I mean many other things. Ability to comfort others, ability to understand how people felt, ability to point people in the right direction, or even give them money. People need money. Well, here's some money. Don't worry about it. Here's some money. This will, because I felt that God, everything I gave, God gave to me to give on. And now I take the view, this might sound unusual, but all the money in the charity, for example, in millions, is all God's money anyway. I'm not taking any of it. Tanya isn't taking any of it. I mean, obviously from a legal point of view, but I mean, now, spiritually and everything, it's all God's money. And all our money is anyway, if we're going to be honest about it. So use it in a good way, as he would use it, as he want you to use it, for the benefit of others. Because having lots of money is sometimes useful, but largely it's not that useful, because most of it sits there doing nothing. Put it bluntly. So my time now is really invested in helping other people. Tanya and I should say, all the people that work in charity. But God leads us, coming back to that strand, of where to go. And we say, visiting with government, and we say, God is our CEO, we say. And sometimes they have to say, well, we come in peace. We say, as you sit down, and we will leave in peace. We say that to some, people like Jeff Bezos, so, those sorts of people. Not him, but sort of big people who wouldn't normally, you think, listen to such thought. And sometimes we've even said to top government ministers, well, if Jesus was here in the room now, what would he say about what we should be doing? And how you, as a democratic leader, elected by the people, what should you respond and do? Because that's how we feel it, and that seems right, because it's like taking something out of the living Bible and putting it honestly on the table and saying it's about the people. It's about everybody. It's not just about the rich getting richer, for example. It's about equity for all, fairness, and love, actually. I think it's one word I should say. Love always wins out over hate. So if anyone's got any bugbears, drop them at the door as you do that, to your exit. Love will always win out massively. We found that again and again. And people who are angry, like I talked about being angry earlier. It's love that has basically turned me ultimately into a person who can now sit and talk to you today. It's not, anything else, not more brutality. It's love given through other people, but given to me really from God, from Jesus. I mean, really, I couldn't say it's like the most amazing transformative power of healing. It's remarkable.
It's great to hear. We should bring our question time to an end, but why not briefly? I'd love to hear from both of you to end. There's a question here. We've spoken about the inevitability of hard times, as you've shared that particularly tragic story. But which parts of the Bible have encouraged you through hard times? Maybe you could both speak to that briefly. In real life, what does it look like to have your faith engaged with even the hardest of times?
Well, what I would say is that I love the songs, which, if you don't know where they are in the Bible, just open it in the middle and you will find them. And they were really the hymns of the early church, if you like, before the people of God, before Jesus was even born on the earth. But in those 150 or so psalm songs that believers sing, there are actually songs for every season of the soul, from utter despair. Just read Psalm 88 and you'll get a sense of a man in the depths of depression, to Psalms are great joy and rejoicing in a close walk with God and everything in between. So I think if I could only pick one book, it would be the Psalms, because they describe every experience that I go through, even as a believer in Jesus. And the Bible is such an honest book. It describes, it comes alive to you, because nothing is hidden from view, and every human emotion finds its expression and is related back to God. And perhaps that book, the Psalms, does that more than any other for me.
Yeah, I think I just make it relatable, perhaps, to something else. I'll continue. It's to touch on quite a few places in the Bible, but it's forgiveness. I think I use that word, forgiveness. And I think, I don't know about all of you, but certainly possibly as you get older, you have more life experience, just by virtue of just having had more years, you accumulate more anger and annoyance, either against your own family, brothers, sisters, must be your children, for whatever reasons, needing, and maybe certainly your parents and other members of the family, and even friends, etc. Or your employer. My gosh, now I say there's loads of opportunities. I didn't realise it was that really. Okay. So, and as I did, I literally led a very judgmental life. Always judging people. You're not good enough what you're doing. You work for me, you did like 10 years, whatever, and you're not delivering on time. Or why aren't you working a bit more on the weekend? It's never ending, exhausting and never ending. It doesn't do anyone any good. It's, for example, that sort of thing, judging people. Well, as you heard, the man I thought I was at one point ready to murder, but actually forgave him, basically. So that forgiveness, the power and transformative effect of forgiveness is so amazing. It's not something I would have ever realized before, because I would have lived my life up to whatever age that would be, building up more and more of a tally sheet, burden of tally sheet, just strapped around like a weight on my legs and my shoulders, as I still tried to live the life as I thought I'd done in this world, and actually never getting there. In fact, actually becoming more probably depressed and more angry and less getting on with people. And you might think, well, surely as you get older, you make more friends, or probably something losing friends. And family, and then people would die, and my mum or my dad, etc., as happened. And there was a lot of unresolved issues, anger, blame, etc. But the power of forgiveness, just ask, as we've found with Tanya and I, sometimes very difficult to forgive people, especially if you've held on to it from the school playground, such and such used to bully me for years or whatever. But we found that if you actually ask Jesus for help with the forgiveness, if you've got a willing heart, you'll know it straight away. And you can ask for help. Help me, you say. Help me forgive my friend or boyfriend, ex-boyfriend. I don't know, whatever it might mean, partner or something to different people. Help me, Jesus, to do it. And you really mean it. You will do it. And you'll make it so transformative and relatively simple and easy to do, as it happened for me. It was not a struggle. It was given to me, and I was able to pick it up and hand it on like that. Incredibly. And it released me completely and allowed me to become a way better version of ourselves. So if I'd say one thing, sorry to go on, all those self-help books, all those podcasts, Stephen Barber, blah, 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 blah. You know them all, don't you? People do. Endless. On Apple, this, on, whatever, Spotify app. All of that lot, honestly, as everybody, tries to be better, more performance, more understanding, more control performance, usual stuff. Right? Actually, it's a hiding to nowhere. Really ask in your heart, know probably what's right. And so the Bible will lead you to that. For reading it and having more of an understanding, just ask Jesus to help you to deliver upon some of those things. He will. And the outcome of that is you'll be 10 times the man that Stephen Barber is. That's in jest. But you know what I'm saying? I'm trying to make it yeah.
Thank you so much, Nadim and Neil, for all of the time and energy and honesty that you've given us this evening. Let's put our hands together.